Well, we're on World War II, and there have been many movies made of this era. And obviously, you can watch the History Channel and learn so much, which I encourage you to do. And we're going to look at your book and then how it's presented there. So, Section 1, Paths to War. This is only Section 1 and 2. Aggressive moves by Germany and Japan set the stage for World War II. In 1935, Adolf Hitler began a massive military buildup and instituted a violation, a draft in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. In 1936, Hitler sent troops into the Rhineland, which alarmed France, but neither France nor Britain responded with force. In 1936, Germany and Italy became allies, as did Germany and Japan. Germany annexed Austria in 1938. Appeasement, and it should say appeasement of Germany, peaked at the Munich conference, where Hitler claimed he sought only one final territory, the Czech Sudetenland, and Britain and France agreed to Hitler's demands. This soon proved false, as Hitler continued his invasions. When Hitler signed the non-aggression pact with Stalin and invaded Poland, Britain and France declared war on Germany. Japanese expansion into Manchuria and northern China brought condemnation from the League of Nations. Japan was at war with China. In December 1937, Japan destroyed Nanjing and massacred 100,000 civilians and prisoners of war. Next, Japan was rebuked by the United States for its efforts to exploit resources in French Indochina. So, we're going to kind of look at what was happening with Hitler during this buildup as far as how we get to World War II, or how Europe gets to World War II. If you notice the map at the center, I'll read the very first steps. Hitler formed a new air force and then built an army up from 100,000 to 550,000. Other countries were distracted by the Great Depression, so they weren't paying close attention to this. And of course, this was a violation of the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I. On March 7, 1936, Hitler sent troops to the Rhineland, again kind of ignored. Germany was not supposed to be there or do any of these things according to the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I. Great Britain and France could attack, but decided on appeasement, which is a diplomatic policy aimed at avoiding war by making concessions to an aggressor. Maybe you see this in your own family sometimes. New alliances began to happen. An alliance is an agreement to work together. As we saw in World War I, Hitler and Mussolini was from Italy, wanted to create a new Roman Empire. In October of 1935, Italy invaded Ethiopia. Both helped the Franco in Spain in the Spanish Civil War. The Roman-Berlin Axis became an alliance between Italy and Germany. Then the union with Austria. Well, it's kind of a union, but really Hitler just kind of took it over. In 1938, Hitler forced Austrian Chancellor to put Nazis in charge of the government. Germany controlled Austria by March 13, 1938. Remember, he was from Austria, so it was kind of a coming home in his own mind. The demands and appeasement, well, September 15, 1938, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, and at the Munich conference, leaders appeased him by allowing him to occupy that particular amount of land, and Hitler thought them weak. So you could see with Great Britain and France, they didn't really react, so he didn't take them very seriously. So he decided, what the heck, let's take over Czechoslovakia too. So Great Britain then realized that Hitler could not be trusted. You know what they say, the old saying goes, hindsight is 20/20, which hindsight is your ability to look back. And so obviously our ability to look back shows us that we have clear vision to see that of course Hitler cannot be trusted. He killed 12 million people. Aside from who got killed in the war, those were just concentration camp numbers. So he began negotiations with Stalin, even though he hated communism. And Stalin, negotiation begins with Stalin and Great Britain. Hitler met with Stalin, the USSR, in August 23, 1939, in the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. They agreed not to attack each other. If Hitler maybe decided to go into Poland, Stalin could have a piece of it. So, September 1st, 1939, Hitler attacked Poland at the beginning of World War II. This is really the start of it. And what's funny is I see so many dates through history that coincide with family birthdays. You guys should just look at them for fun. Now, we know that there were two what we call theaters of war. Theaters are the areas where we're watching the war happen. There's one in Europe and there's one in the Pacific. Fortunately, there was not one on American soil. Remember, Hawaii was not technically a state at this time. So, war with China. In 1931, Japan attacked China in Manchuria to take their natural resources. Look at the map as I read this to you. Japanese soldiers were disguised as Chinese. Though the League of Nations investigated, the Japanese kept a strong hold on the area. China worried about communists in the west and Japanese in the east. They were feeling sandwiched between these two forces. Appeasement began with Japan. Again, in 1937, Japan declared war on China and seized Nanjing. The Asian New Order would unite Manchuria, China, and Japan. Japan began to work with the Nazis to attack the Soviets, but Nazis signed a non-aggression pact with USSR. The U.S. threatened sanctions, the restrictions of to enforce the law. We have those on Cuba as well as Iran. Japan did not want to risk losing U.S. products, but decided to attack Southeast Asia and with the U.S. and European colonies. That's what we're there. Now here's where we have our little review question section, and you can see those review questions there. I will give you a second to look at them. You will probably see one of those on your questions. Section 2. German forces swept through Central and Northern Europe early in the war. After Germany occupied 3/4 of France, Hitler set up the Vichy government in France. Meanwhile, the United States followed a policy of isolationism. German air attacks on Great Britain resulted in fierce British retaliation. In the east, harsh weather and a resolute Soviet Union defeated an invading German army. The Japanese conquered the Pacific but miscalculated when they attacked the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor. The United States surprised Japan by abandoning its neutrality and entering the war to retake the Pacific. By the end of 1943, the tide had turned against Germany, Italy, and Japan. After the invasion of Normandy, the Allies liberated Paris, freed them, and defeated Germany. The war in Asia continued until the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, causing a massive casualties and bringing Japan to surrender. Now, let's break that down and look specifically at who is fighting whom in Europe. If you guys can look at this map, you can see where the battles are mostly concentrated. You can also see to the left the Axis powers are Germany, Italy, and Japan. Of course, we're not showing Japan because we are looking at a map of Europe. Allied powers, the United Kingdom, which is made up of, if you look up to the left corner there, North Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and England, the USA, and the Soviet Union, or USSR. Most of the major cities damaged by war were found in Germany and in England. So if you look at the way these are divided up, you could see who the Axis powers are by the orange, and then you could see the locations controlled by the Axis powers. And the Vichy France, which means France is divided. Then you can see the Allied powers are in that greenish colored, and the Allied controlled areas. Now notice North Africa. If you guys see North Africa, we will be talking about that a little bit later, and how North Africa with Rommel from Germany, many battles were fought there. And then you can see where Sicily is at the tip of the boot of Italy. We will eventually jump over and go through that area across the Mediterranean Sea in order to get a stronghold through Italy. Those will be different battles that we will look at here in the future. Before we do that, let's look at this section 2, the course of World War II. Hitler's early victory. We have Blitzkrieg, which of course is called Lightning War. After the slow trench warfare of World War I, Hitler knew that fighting fast was the key to winning. And with his Panzer Division, which were Panzers were the tanks, 300 tanks, on April 9th, 1940, after dividing Poland with USSR, Hitler attacked Denmark and Norway. Then, on May 7th, 1940, he attacked the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. Hitler attacked France in the unexpected way, so France signed an armistice, which is like an agreement, to be peaceful, on June 22nd. France was now occupied by Germany. The U.S. denounced Hitler but did not enter the war. The battle for Britain. The Luftwaffe was the German Air Force, and what he decided to do, Hitler did, was to weaken the British people by bombing them and bombing them and bombing them. He started on August 1940. Germany attacked Great Britain from the air, not just military targets, but civilian targets. He thought there'd be more appeasement if the British people were attacked, but in fact, they were actually more resilient. Then the attack on the Soviet Union. He didn't want a two-front war. If you go back and look at that last slide, obviously that would mean going to the east and going to the west, yet again, just like World War I. But he thought the USSR was supplying Great Britain, so out of his paranoia, Hitler decided to attack in the spring, but there was a delay on his attack, and he attacked a large front, 1,800 miles long. Apparently, he did not really study Napoleon's idea of invading Russia. And so what happened was winter came early. The Russian people were very resilient as well. And they stopped Germany as well as this cold winter, which also stopped Napoleon. Now let's turn to the Pacific. In the Pacific, what I want you to see in this picture is the way that Japan wanted to go into these different islands and steal their natural resources from them. One of the largest natural resources comes from a plant. It's rubber. And rubber makes many, many things, including tires. And so that was very important to the Japanese government. They do attack Pearl Harbor on December 7th. This is a military base in Hawaii on the island of Oahu. It is not a state in the United States yet. On the same day, the Japanese also attacked the Philippines and the British colony of Malaya. By the spring of 1942, Japan controlled all of Southeast Asia and much of the Western Pacific. Japan now declared, he felt, Emperor Hirohito, Greater East Asia Prosperity Sphere. That was the new name for that particular area. Now the attack on Pearl Harbor, you can see the way that the planes were coming in. And people were on, they call that North Shore at the very top area, and they saw the planes coming in these different areas, and they knew something bad was going to happen. You could see where Pearl Harbor is located. It is a deep water harbor that could hold large battleships close to shore. That's very important. And it was located in Pacific, where unfortunately many of our ships were there. They were not in California. So they were able to take out quite a few of our battleships, which are very expensive to build and take quite a long time, especially back then. And so when we lost battleships during this particular time, it really hurt the Americans as far as going to war, which is why Japan thought that we would just kind of give up and not do anything. So here are the areas of battles that we will look at for the battles in the Pacific. I just want you to look very, very carefully at this slide. You can see some of the very important ones. I wish I could point to you. Iwo Jima, the Battle of Wake Islands, the Battle of Midway. You can see Pearl Harbor over to the right where the Hawaiian Islands are. Island hopping was the term used to describe the United States' advance across the Pacific to gain control over Japan's hold on the many islands. Just look how close they came to Australia. The Battle of Coral Sea we will discuss in just a second. It was also extremely important. And then you could see the way the United States, the Allied offenses went into and near Japan. And then we eventually dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and then 3 days later on Nagasaki. And you could see where those bombs were dropped. And you could see the area that was controlled by Japan and the Japanese controlled areas. Okay, here we have in section 2, to the left we have the Allies' advance, and then to the right we have the last years of the war. And these two areas are divided up by the European and the Asian theater. In the European theater we have, of course, the big three leaders, Great Britain, the United States, and the USSR. Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the United States, and Joseph Stalin of the USSR decided to fight until Germany and Japan surrendered. That was how far they were willing to take this. Hitler saw victories in North Africa, but by the fall of 1942, Rommel, Hitler's leader in Africa, had to retreat. Hitler wanted to attack the USSR in Stalingrad. Bad idea. Stalingrad ends up being a very, very difficult military move because, again, the people were extremely resolute and they fought them off. You'll see a video about this a little later. In the Pacific, the Asian theater, by 1942, the battle in the East also started to change. By May 7th, 1942, Americans stopped the Japanese and saved Australia from invasion. On June 4th, the Battle of Midway Island and the U.S. planes destroyed 4 attacking Japanese aircraft carriers. This defeated the Japanese Navy and established U.S. superiority in the Pacific. By 1942, Douglas MacArthur was in charge of the U.S. operations in the Pacific. He becomes one of the very, very famous generals during this war. There's Eisenhower and Patton and MacArthur, just some very famous American heroes during this war. In the last years of the war, Africa had fallen, so the Americans attacked Italy through the island of Sicily. This is where Patton was. Mussolini was removed from office by the Italians, and Germany controlled parts of Italy. June 4th, 1944, the Allies, the UK, the US, USSR, had a plan to attack through France, D-Day. On June 6, 1944, Dwight Eisenhower, a U.S. general, landed in Normandy, France. Eventually, 2 million troops were there within 3 months. Germany did not expect this. They did not have the resistance that they expected by Germany in this particular area, and so that's why the Americans or the Allied forces were able to get 2 million troops there. Hitler moved into his bunker 55 feet underground, and on May 7th, 1945, Victory in Europe Day was achieved. Hitler, of course, committing suicide on April 30th, 1945, with his girlfriend, Eva Braun. In Asia, President Roosevelt died in April of 1944. He did have polio, and all of his pictures show him standing or leaning or holding onto somebody, but he, in fact, was in a wheelchair. You have been immunized against polio. Harry Truman became president, and he was developing an atomic weapon. He used the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this, of course, caused Japan to realize the might and power of these bombs and wanted them to stop. So he decided to sign a surrender on VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day, August 14th, 1945. It is estimated that approximately 50 million people died during this war. And if you just look at 12 million being in German and Polish concentration camps alone, you could take out how many of these people were civilians. Obviously, not all people were fighting on the battlefield. So here is the review for this particular section. Go ahead and take a second to look at that. And while you're looking at that, I just have to put in a commercial to say that obviously there are so many small aspects. This is your world history class that just kind of gets a chance to glance at something as big as World War II. And I hope that you can take one of these topics, Google it, and watch the History Channel or YouTube and learn something new.